So two gentlemen who you've seen before, they have busy roles in the foundation. First, Clarence Hunter, who is chair of our grants committee, and Dr. Brian Appleby will tell you about our grants program.
Thank you. Good morning. The first thing I want to say, isn't it great to be here in the room together with each other and not being virtual? Just being able to see people in the hallway and talk to them and find out their stories has just made this a unbelievable event and has added to the spirit of the foundation. When I arrived here on Friday, one of the things that we went around the room and talked about our various stories. Some were older than others, but one of the things that we saw was frustration, helplessness. People were a little bit, so how can we in 2023 be in this situation where there's a disease killing people at 100% and we don't seem to know anything about it? So what I'm going to do today is show how some of you, or all of you, can become personally involved in fighting this disease. This year we've allocated $718,000 plus to grants. 8 of them went to were actually grants for research, and $100,000 went to a fellowship, and Dr. Appleby can talk to you about that. Now, what is a grant? Well, a grant is your chance to impact how we research this disease, okay? Individuals or groups can donate money for a specific purpose. Most of our donations are in the form of research grants. We get, and as you saw from the last presentation, there are donations through STRIDES, memorial grants, and grant builders. Memorial grants are usually in the sum of $10,000 or more towards a specific purpose. Grant builders are things that can be built. They start at $5,000, but you can start at a much lower amount and build upon it over time until you reach your goal, okay? Each of the researchers, which it was great being able to sit in the same room with the people who are doing the work that we want done, but you can see that they were sponsored by varying members. You know, they named people or memorials that have been built. So again, this is our chance to directly impact what we're doing. So to date, there have been $4 million total. That's a big amount, okay? A lot of money. You're saying about 150 people, 200 people over time that put together a lot of money to help fight this. The grants are family friendly because you're the ones who direct the research. As you saw, the researchers were very responsive to you. They wanted to meet you. They wanted to get your energy. And then they come back, and we had sessions yesterday where they relayed their, what they were doing, and you could talk back and forth to them, okay? You can see the impact that they've had on the disease. We've met our researchers, and we've developed important relationships. And by the way, they go and tell their friends and say, hey, look, this is something you might want to do. And of course, the motivation and so forth is there. This is how the grants have looked over time. You can see that they've gone up every year except for 21, which was the COVID year. And the cycle itself runs like this. In May, a letter goes out requesting them. They send in requests. We kind of review them, send out letters to those that we want to send full proposals, and then it's decided on who will do what, who will get the grants towards the end of the year, and then they are presented. So that's the cycle, and without further ado, Dr. Appleby.
Thanks, Clarence. I'm just going to review a little bit more about the grants program. So from a researcher's perspective, these kind of grants, they're actually, in the scheme of scientific research, kind of small grants. But hopefully you'll understand why I think that's actually what makes them more important from a scientific perspective. But generally, these grants will cover what we refer to as a pilot project. So what that means is it's not really a full funded project, but kind of, just an idea that you have that you kind of want to test it to see if it's going to work. So oftentimes these kind of grants are for riskier scientific projects. what we like to call a high risk, high reward. A perfect example of that is like Dr. Shetty's copy number variant, right? And no one else has really thought to do that. It's kind of a shot in the dark, but if it's positive, it makes a huge impact. So that's the kind of grants we want to fund. A lot of it's proof of concepts, much like her and other persons' projects were. Again, you don't really know. You're just trying to see if it's something that you want to flesh out later on. And oftentimes, the data used from these grants, if it's successful, will be used for much larger grants that are usually in the hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, and federal level called a RO1. But in order to get a big federal RO1 grant, you have to almost always have a pretty significant amount of preliminary data. It's just how the research field works. So by applying to a CJD Foundation grant, they're able to generate that data for these much bigger grants. From a financial perspective, the funds are often used to cover salary support for the investigator or for their staff or for a postdoc, equipment that they may need in the lab to do the work, supplies as well. But the money from a research perspective really, doesn't really go a long way, $50,000. But from what we've seen when we look at these funds, they really do their best to put it to good use. So what are some of the topics people can talk about and do in their projects? As you see in this weekend, they can do basic science, so understanding the basics of prion biology. They may do what we refer to as translational science, so something that may have been found in the lab, you want to translate it to how it might actually impact human prion disease. We see that a lot. Biomarkers, which are basically diagnostic tools, whether it's spinal fluid testing, blood testing, brain imaging, that can be helpful to diagnose, predict, or track a disease. Treatment targets, as you saw with some of our grants this weekend, and that includes not just treating people who are actively symptomatic with the disease, but people who may be at risk and you want to prevent or delay the onset of the illness. As you saw also, like with Dr. Castilla, is developing disease models, right? So there are certain settings that we can create in the laboratory that help us study the disease better and more efficiently. And in his case, an animal model that would be much quicker to study in the lab. And then sometimes we have platform type projects. What that means is you're developing a technique or an infrastructure that is not a project in and of itself, but may be very helpful and useful for other people's projects or either their own projects later on. So the grant review process, you heard a little bit earlier, we have a scientific advisory committee that reviews all grants. It's a two-step application process, so there'll be a letter of intent. It's usually a one-page kind of description of the kind of project and the aims that they want to do with that project, as well as who's going to be working on it. We usually get about 40 of these a year, and then we try to see how much money we're going to have to give for full applications, and we try to do a 2 or 3 to 1 allocation of reviewing the full application. So that's usually close to half of the letters of intent we get a full application for, which is a 4-page application that goes into specific details of what the project is. And we ask some specifics. We ask them to really justify how this is impact human prion disease in patients. We also ask them to include lay language as well that we use later on here at the conference as well as on the Foundation's website. Both steps are reviewed by the Scientific Advisory Committee. Of course, many of us are also in the field, so if either we have done work related to that project or we're in the same institution, we do not review those grants. We let the other Scientific Advisory Committee members review it, and we recuse ourselves. And the grants are scored and ranked, and starting this year, we start meeting after all of that. It's a Scientific Advisory Committee, and with Debbie as well, who knows how much money we have to give out, and we choose the grants and award them. So what are some of the grant outcomes? As you would expect with high risk, high reward, we have a lot of hit or miss results, but I would argue that that is the point of these grants. We don't always want successful projects. If we do, that's a little bit suspicious anyway, right? So we should remember that. Negative results, I would argue, are equally as important, if not more important, than positive results for these types of grants. A lot of them do go to publication, and some of them will be used for these larger federally funded grants that I talked about earlier, like an RO1. And I'm always asked to give a review of what are some of the big projects that have really moved the field, that were CJD Foundation funded. And to be kind of honest, it's kind of hard, right? Because there's a lot of them, but when you do this every year, you don't want to keep saying the same ones over and over again. So, I was sending this slide deck back to Debbie and Clarence, and I had this idea, and I had to say, they're going to see this blank slide, and they're going to be like, oh, God, Appleby's lost it, right? So, but I intentionally left this slide blank because I'm going to argue this year that some of the most important projects the CJD Foundation has funded are ones with negative results, right? Because if you think of the utility of that, these are small grants, right? So they did not go to the R01 mechanism, which are few and far between, and don't go to a whole lot of prion disease researchers. That's a lot of money. So they don't go to that step. So what that means is that we're actually saving time and money in our field if we're able to kind of try out these high risk, high rewards, and they're negative. We move on. We don't, continue to try to investigate them and spend a lot of unnecessary time and money. And I think Eric and Sonia can speak to this. They're always trying new projects, and I'll let you guys comment on how many are negative, but it's more the rule than the exception, right? And that's very important, actually, and very important to the field to save time and energy. So progress, despite what I said about negative results, you can see here that we've made a lot of progress in funding these. And I don't think it is a coincidence that if you look at the progress of our field, you also see that we kind of have this exponential law of accelerating returns that I talked about a few years ago of progress, right? And that has a lot to do with just what we're learning as a field and the financial resources that's being applied to the field, not just from the CJD Foundation, but also its advocacy work and trying to get larger degrees of federal funding in this space. And as I talked about a couple years ago, once you kind of start hitting that inflection curve, it's just all up from there. And I really think that we're seeing that now, especially when we see more and more pharmaceutical companies, which have a lot more money than we do, interested in the space. So I think we're going to continue this trend. So thank you to everyone who supported the grants programs, of course the donors, to the foundation grants, Strides for CJD, all the memorial grant funders, of course the researchers as well, and the scientific advisory committee, and of course we're very thankful to everyone that comes to the conference because it means a lot to the researchers to meet family members and know directly how their work is impacting others. So thank you very much.